Grant us eyes. Luna threw a peek inside one of the operating rooms. Inside stood several good doctors, whose name escaped her at the moment, in the midst of an intricate operations of sorts. Her knowledge about their process only extended itself to the quantity of blood they were using. She nodded assertively to herself and moved on. This would be her second occasion strolling through the newly constructed research hall, having not yet familiarized herself with its grand perimeters. Though most treatments occurred all over Yarnum, with different clinics opening up with their own trained doctors, all granted with their permission to exercise the church blood ministrations. Most of the procedures carried out within the research hall were therefore highly unusual cases, experiments, or educational. From within the Grand Cathedral, out of the public's eye, the research continued, and she wondered if what she had just sneaked a glance at was one of the experimental treatments. Sometimes even the godly blood could not take quick enough effect on emergencies. The window depraved and spacious corridor led her to a crossway. She had admittedly no real conception of where they led, and she simply mindlessly walked down to the right, striking her as more welcoming with having a window at the end. A door stood slightly ajar on her way. Inside sat a man she vaguely remembered having had one or two interactions with, writing as if entranced. She walked by. To her surprise, mostly due to rarely ever seeing him within the hall, her tall friend sporting a top hat turned a corner further down the hall. "Hey, Garman." Her voice unintentionally came out in an unwelcoming tone, one she worried he would mistake for dismissive towards him, when in reality it was her mood overall. "What are you up to?" He stopped and smiled. "Good evening, Luna. I actually have something you would like to know." Her monotone drowsiness faded and she excitedly raised her eyebrows. "Well, well, I never thought I would be gossiping with you." Whatever was on his mind made the smirk he managed to squeeze out appear insincere. No, nothing like that, I'm afraid." Out from the inner pocket of his overcoat he handed her a paper. "A list, with the experimental administrations. 9 out of 20 have been put to rest from extreme symptoms." "9?" She gasped and took the paper. "That's nearly half. When did the first one emerge?" "Just shortly after. Within the week. I surmise, due to the time passed, that the last one of them just surfaced. The rest have shown nothing close to a sign." She fixed her attention at the list so as to not have to meet German's eyes. "The numbers are not good," he said, already sounding accustomed to the tragedy. "Actions must be taken, for the sake of the citizens and my own wards. I despise how easily they grow accustomed to their new duties." "And what about you? You will tell us if it becomes too much, right?" She gently and a bit awkwardly placed a hand on his upper arm. "It has to be done, for their sake. But if you would be quick about attending to the matter, I would have to do less of it, which would be nice." Luna had always perceived German as the one that always had a deeper insight somehow. He possessed a greater sense of instincts than anybody she knew. With Lawrence it was different. They could finish each other's thoughts. He could turn her incomplete idea into a whole one. But in scenarios like this, German was the rock, and at times it could infuriate her mind when no logic could prove the source of his sage advice or uncanny instincts.
Be honest with me. Is this right? I can tell you here and now that we are nowhere near a solution. We still need more references, and that would mean more becoming like... Anyways, I still personally believe the cause is individually inherent. Some people will just respond wrong to it. And who knows why? It is the god's blood, for God's sake.
Does it aggravate you?
Sure, not finding solutions. But it has recently made me feel uninspired. Perhaps it is just a difficulty, but all the same. Something tells me the answer will come eventually. But not just now. Sorry.
He listened to her increasingly fraught explanation and turned silent, thinking to himself. What one begins, one should finish. The process is grim, I know, but it also brings great comfort to a great many. But like I said, and if you think back, was there not something you began and did not finish? She thought for a time, looking into his silvery eyes.
Oh, you.
She slapped her hand on his shoulder more playfully than before.
Thank you.
He nodded, smirking slightly, and walked past her. With German's vague advice still present in her mind, she continued down the hallway. Now with a destination she intended to reach. Although her knowledge of the place had not yet changed, and she was still drifting aimlessly in a place she had not yet comprehended the layout of, turning left and right on whims. Her destination being Carol's new workspace, but as her method of journey would indicate, she knew not entirely where it was.
Curses, I should have asked German while at it.
She muttered. There was a faint notion in the back of her mind that Carol had commented on the view from her window. So she based her search on a higher floor and somewhere in the west wing. The place, according to herself, had the best view. She turned into a long hallway and judged the corridor much too boring to house her friend. But as she sped through, a door slowly opened and she just managed to stop herself from crashing into it. Her judgment had been partially correct, paired with some timing, as it was Carol herself who had emerged from the door.
Hello, Luna. Are you having lunch as well?
Outside of the grand gate of the nearly finished cathedral, one was immediately descending many steps of stone, winding down the hill and ending at a grand, soon-to-be round plaza. Ever since the construction was made public, many would invest to be the grand cathedral's neighbor. So construction soon expanded to not only building a church, but an entire district. During the humongous operation of moving equipment, ordering additional miscellaneous, and indoctrinating additional staff, the respite provided from the locale of the plaza was welcomed as often as it could be afforded. On their way out, they grabbed a basket and departed with their lunch from the kitchen, one more akin to providing lunch for a regiment due to how numerous their staff had grown. Today they enjoyed fried fish, potatoes and peas. The autumn air had yet to grow cold, and one was still capable of comfortably dining outside before the frost and snow arrived. They sat down on a bench with a view of the sturdy builders hard at work. Constructed houses had yet to surround the plaza, and there was no telling at the moment how grand the plans were for the up-and-coming cathedral ward. Beyond the foundations was the rest of town as seen from the hill, with both forest and farmscape beyond.
Tea, Luna?
Mm-hmm.
You had something on your mind.
Luna had already managed to stuff her mouth with potatoes, delaying her response while a patiently smiling Carol waited.
I just heard from German how many that had succumbed to the side effects. Let's just say the numbers made me think about the current state. Not that I have lost hope with the blood. I think it's grand. But it got me evaluating. How much progress have we made regarding the nature of the Great Ones?
Carol nibbled thoughtfully at her dish.
Well, I do agree. And I think I know what you mean. It has been nice, after all, to be able to continue my own work seriously. I'm not saying I think it is a waste. It started to feel uncomfortable. It is blood, after all. Why not consider working with me for a spell? It will at least be a change of subject.
She stared at her fish impaled on the fork, lost in thoughts.
I would only be a distraction. Besides, I already figured out something. Just not the whole of it. Oh? What might it be? I feel like a complete fool. But I only do so now because it is possible to pursue different avenues. Back then I had to choose. And logic dictated at the time that the blood was scientifically more sound and based within our scope of reason. Drat! Now I have to reconsider. What a bother.
She sank slightly lower on the bench next to Carol, who remained with her back straight.
I understand. But there is no shame in starting up an old inquiry. It happens all the time, after all. I know, but with all this drama... Oh. You should do it despite it all.
She slurped on her steaming beverage.
I would liken it to the conception of a rune. In part, it is beyond our control. It is simply something we try to understand. Sometimes it is we that receive a thought or an idea that leads us somewhere. Other times it feels like the idea itself was already there. But what I mean is, in part, your inspiration comes and goes, aggravatingly beyond your control. You should let it rain freely.
Her words made her think of older times. Like the present now echoed that specific bygone wisdom, but with a different voice. It also made her truly feel like the advice given to her by German had only been given more unnecessary meaning than it ought to, by her own mind at that. The answer was simple, just as simple as the advice had been presented. But the circumstances were not.
Yeah, I know. Like old times. Perhaps you ought to try at least. He always had the answers.
Luna sighed, resigned and knowing full well what ought to be done, if she ever was supposed to feel compassion for her work once more.
Whatever will Lawrence think of this?
Luna had finally departed the gravesite forest after having caught herself stalling for the third time. It was a bit of a detour, but she preferred the scenery. It was quite a monumental place with the large obelisk gravestones, believed once upon a time to be the resting places of gods. Like they had grown out from the ground itself, innumerable headstones stood crowded in patches and littered all over in between the trees. Of course, the old belief paled considerably in light of new discoveries. She had walked through the scenic point of interest with a loose idea of perhaps conducting a proper excavation, so as to the very least determine if they were actually graves. But her reasons only functioned as excuses for so long, and she was forced to continue onward. The years that had passed were made known in the trees' wild growth. A great ceiling of arching, far-spreading branches, with the ground enveloped by their snake-like roots. The road had since devolved into a mere footpath, winding through the forest. Luna did not mind, though. With the orange and yellow leaves covering the ground and the white, cloudy sky, she was perfectly content with the promenade. Yet a little thorn ached in her heart at seeing the magic gone from the place. Now the forest started to take on a frightening appearance. Even during daytime, it was a place she would rather not linger in. Despite the absence of proper pathing, with her previous knowledge, she could easily trace the ancient steps. In light of the institution's fading rumor, the state of the road definitely marked its glory days as long since past. She turned down a slight side path towards her intended destination, just to satisfy her itching nostalgia. She came to find that the sweet gratification only served the already aching thorn. Left unattended for years, the clearing in the forest had not seen any practice. Its many platforms and planks had fallen to rot. No one had need for it. Its practitioners were elsewhere. It was quiet as she approached the main ground. It seemed almost dead. No students converging outside to study. No teachers walking to and fro from lecture to lecture. Still, the magnificence of Bergenworth held strong against time. Even with its faded and forgotten eminence, the structure still stood firm and in fine condition. As she was held in bitter awe, a figure emerged from the lecture hall and set off towards the main building. Luna stepped through the gate and onto the large ground in between the two structures, so as to attract the familiar character's attention. He stopped in surprise at first, tense and stiffly at the sight of a stranger, but shifted at further observation.
Luna, what are you doing here? Is it truly you?
None other, dear Doris. What's the problem with the attitude around here?
She approached the old, disheveled teacher, who looked like he had been stuffed inside a closet, only to emerge at her return. He wore the same old teacher's robes as he did during her time. The only difference was that his posture was not as formal as it used to be.
Well, it's good to see you. I hear my teaching was not in vain. Pardon my curiosity, but what in the world brings you back?
I was hoping I could speak with Master Willem. I have been thinking much about his work lately.
She threw her glance around in a conspicuous remark.
Seeing this place, I hope the work is still continued on.
She quickly regretted her remark, as it may have come across as hurtful, regarding how accurate it sounded.
So, how are the days here? I see few students.
Oh, we don't teach anymore. We just do research. No time for teaching new minds and all that.
It seemed to her that he lost himself in memories, perhaps longing back to the old days. Before she could comment on the institution's state further, he continued.
But our work is continuing, and with hasty steps, might I add. Dare I say you might regret leaving if you knew what we have stumbled upon.
His voice had no enthusiasm or even spitefulness. Though Doris never was a man to hold a grudge, his statement was exceptionally cold and factual.
I bet. It would not surprise me.
Oh, but it would. Most definitely. Indeed it would. Yes, it would. Oh, but I should not say too much. It might not end well if one say too much.
His continuous, monotonous ways began to frighten her slightly. At the least have worries that she might no longer know her old teacher as she once did.
All right. Are you referring to the texts?
Oh, well, those measly things. Oh, sure, in a way, perhaps. Oh, Luna, you tease out the old teacher in me. To learn the things I know now. What a pleasure it would have been.
Is that why it is so empty around here? Why not teach anymore? I thought Bergenworth's whole thing was to enlighten future generations.
Indeed, but the future generation had other plans. So we had to continue without it. The work has become far more important as it is.
Doris, I am growing concerned here. Do you mind telling me what is so important as to close down the place?
That you will have to ask the master about. It is not my place to disclose such topics.
She looked at him with wild disbelief, unlike him, who stared unflinchingly with deep eyes and an apathetic face.
Perhaps the question is silly to you, but it remains curious all the same. But why did you leave? I understand the temptations of a young mind, but it would appear, in retrospect, that it seemed rather rushed. Or am I wrong?
She did not feel like humoring his suspicions. After they received the funding from the mayor, many scholars from abroad recognized their coming success. Minds from all over traveled to Yarnam to be part of the growing movement, and while it may not appear popular news for the common man, it must have been a frequented topic in closed circles. Even additional personnel, students and teachers from Bergenworth, would appear at their door. This whole experience had left her feeling sorry for him, for them all, for whoever was left.
Well, it became hard to stay. We simply did not agree on scientific approaches. But I hope Master Willem will understand.
Dora's expression suddenly became sympathetic and almost mournful. He continued towards the main building and invited her to accompany him.
You ought to get whatever you came here seeking for over with. This place is not what it used to be. But if you feel lost in your work, I gather you still have a place here. But again, it is Master Willem you would want to speak with, not me.
They stopped outside the door to the main building, and he gave her the bundle of papers he was carrying.
Would you mind giving these to the master, since you are going inside? I would not want to intrude on your conversation.
She slowly took the papers.
It was pleasant seeing you again, old man.
A quick urge to cry surfaced, but was easily swallowed. He twitched the edge of his mouth, perhaps an attempted smile, turned and left her. She remained outside for a moment to make sure he was gone, then peeked at the papers she had been given. The interest was quickly lost when she discovered it to be intricately drawn circular patterns. No notes, only symbols that she had no comprehension of. Her own agenda seemed much more important than whatever Doris was working on, and she needed answers and guidance, so she entered. The hall lay dark, besides the lit candles on the main desk in the middle of the room. At the desk, sitting like a statue staring seemingly into nothing from under the mask, was Willem. He eerily turned his head slowly to look at her. It seemed he had been sitting exactly in the same chair, in the exact same spot since they left. His previous scholarly outfit had been exchanged with a white robe draped in a blue flowing cape. They seemed oversized as they poured out from his chair. He was completely still.
I believe...
He pointed towards her with his golden staff.
That is to be delivered to me.
She caught her bearings and walked up to the desk.
I ran into Doris. He asked me to give them to you.
She placed them in front of him on the desk, and he slowly looked down.
What do you think?
Pardon?
The illustrations. What do you think?
There was no use fooling the provost. There never was.
They are strange. What are they?
He snatched up the papers, with an unanticipated speed and threw them into a drawer. Not something you would understand, I'm afraid. The best description of his tone was disappointment, dragging out on the words. He sat still, waiting and glaring at her under the bulging spheres of the mask. She shifted in place, thoroughly uncomfortable.
I don't know what to say. I seek your guidance, as I have done so many times before.
He leaned back and started to rock in his chair, never turning his face away from her. Still in need of guidance? Luna, did you not always know where to look for answers? Her nerves flared up. How could an old and wise scholar like Willem behave as some immature child guarding his secrets?
God, Willem, this is not what our work is about. Keeping the other in the dark. We needed space, a change, but we never did it out of spite. Now I come here, feeling lost, and all you do is treat me like a traitor?
Unfazed by her verbal barrage, he just sat, like he always would, appearing like half of his mind was somewhere else. Betrayal, he said fleetingly. He dragged out on the silence that followed. The blood reveals the next step in evolution, or at least part of it. But everyone knows this, yet some have loftier dreams than others. But not you.
I suppose. It feels like we are standing still, and it would be a lot harder to convince Lawrence of a different approach. So I figured I'll just do it myself.
Yes, quite good. That Lawrence. Admirably stubborn. He smiled faintly as he was reminded of one of his most promising prodigies, but it quickly faded. Yes, quite. You misjudged me, Luna. Believe me when I tell you that you would not understand as you are. But one day... He slowly raised his staff to point at a bookshelf across the room wordlessly. Confused, she looked at him, awaiting a comment. When none was given, she looked instead to where he was pointing. She walked over to the shelf, where it was quite dark. She looked at him, who had lowered his staff and resumed sitting like a statue in the rocking chair. Without instructions, she looked over the books on the shelf. Fauna of the North, Cosmos Lens, History in the Grounds, Ascension in Religion. Only some of the titles. But she gave pause after spotting the latter one. She took it out and read on the cover. A Bergenworth study compiled by Provost Willem. She waved the book at its author. He nodded.
Interesting. I never managed to read this one. Am I mentioned?
It was done after you left. It describes theories of the matter, and how it ties to Themeru's great gods. She flipped through the pages, and as expected, found some of her own studies inside.
Ascension is a given. That I know well enough. But to where?
Ah, clever as ever. You assume it is a where? Well, where do you think?
In a second, in that very moment, that question called out a glittering revelation. The bookshelf. She was about to throw the book she already held while retrieving the Cosmos lens. Reading on the front provided the extra context of it being a query into the manipulation of light through different lenses, specifically in the way starlight was captured.
This. I remember,
She said in awe, then chuckled.
Of course. It makes sense with the literal ascension theory in mind. What did you uncover?
His chair continued rocking back and forth.
You will find out soon enough, Luna. Fear in nature is the impulse to reject, to turn the head in different directions.
I know. It is also the thing that keeps you going in desperate times.
He nodded, smirking ominously.
And evolution might have always favored the coward.
Upon her hand reaching towards the door handle, she first became aware of voices inside, which stopped her motion.
Oh, there is so much that comes to mind already. We will need caterers for the event, and whoever will coordinate the crowd. I fear the constables might be overwhelmed.
Do not fret. I'll oversee the peacekeepers.
The two voices she recognized as the mayor and that of the ominous character Logarius.
Yes, well, but are you for certain it will be finished?
Good, Ethelbert. Lawrence, joyful tone. For the last time, lay your woes to rest. The overseer has assured me that the date I gave you is set in stone.
All right. You have never disappointed me before, Mr. Lawrence. Or will it hence be Vicar Lawrence?
Lawrence will do fine. By that point, she saw it fit to finally make her entrance. Behind the grand door was an empty room, besides a table and a couple of chairs with the rest of the interior likely to arrive at a later date. They stood by a tall, rectangular window overlooking the landscape that stretched all the way to the sea.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Don't mind me. I just need to borrow Lawrence after you are done.
I suspect we were. Lawrence moved to shake the hand of the mayor. The event will be in good hands. Everybody just wants a holy place to be opened. Ethelbert nodded with authority.
Good afternoon.
The two visitors walked past. Ethelbert gave a spirited nod while Logarius merely, and nearly unnoticeably, tilted his chin down. He wanted more details on the opening ceremony. That man. Is it the coin, reputation, or sheer satisfaction of faith that motivates him? I will never quite know. He looked towards her, expecting a reaction in accordance with his commentary, but she was unfazed, preoccupied with every idea that spawned on her journey back. You have something on your mind, darling. He spoke teasingly and, in his own playful manner, left his position at the window to walk closer. She stopped him by holding up the book Willem had allowed her to take.
Take a look at this and tell me your opinion.
Smirkingly, still within his own inclinations, he retrieved the book and inspected its cover. The expression it provoked was by all definition an uncomfortable one. Huh. The old work with light, back at Bergenworth.
You know what I'm thinking?
I'm afraid I don't. Tell me.
I feel myself distracted, if you will. And with recent developments with the blood research, I guess I have just lost my inspiration.
By taking her hand, he gently guided her with him towards the lone table. He sat her down and placed himself in a chair next to her, still lightly holding on to her. Everyone has droughts. You've had plenty. But you always make it through. Don't bother yourself too much with the statistics, even if it might seem discouraging now. Imagine the bigger picture.
It's not that simple this time. I went to see him. You know? That's where I got the book.
He released her hand, leaning back slowly while maintaining his eyes locked with hers. Arms crossed and one leg put over the other.
Have you forgotten, Lawrence, what our goal is?
Of course I haven't.
Then wouldn't you agree to approach it from different fronts?
He smiled peculiarly. And you have come to ask for my permission? Not amused in the slightest, she glared swords and spears at him.
I'm serious.
I am as well. I am also not your master. But I understand. It is a sensitive subject. But you do whatever you feel you must do. Whatever it is, I will always be along for the ride, wherever it takes us. He leaned towards her and reached out his hand once more. She grabbed it and pulled him closer. Not violently, just decisively calm. She kissed him, and his arm wrapped itself around her back.
Oh, Lawrence. I actually thought you would be offended.
What? Like Willem? No, thank you. And you're right. Our goal is much larger than the blood.
Here.
She snatched back the book and flipped through the pages.
Look here.
A celestial dial? What is that?
Well, the basis of my theory is that the Great Ones likely ascended very literally towards the heavens and the cosmos.
His eyes read rapidly over the lines in the book as she pointed on the descriptive images.
So if you tune proper lenses to catch and reflect light like this, however, by utilizing multiple lenses that can overlap each other, we can potentially achieve a greater view.
Oh, so like a telescope of sorts.
Yes, but it needs to be much larger. Even the Temerians used a similar device to that of a clockwork. Somehow they managed to link it, synchronize it with the patterns of the sky. This device, able to catch the direct light of the stars and the cosmos, would then be able to reveal to us different patterns, just like clockwork, but attuned to the great beyond.
My, so this could locate them, track them. She made an uncertain grimace.
Perhaps it won't be that simple. I more so speculate we will find traces, essences, or evidence of what their ascension actually entailed.
So, what is it?
Important. And now I'm certain it will prove to be a guide to unlock hidden meanings of stellar bodies.
Like a telescope?
Sure, but more advanced.
Luna looked over to the foreman, while Maria retained eyesight on the large tower.
What say you, buddy? How long?
The foreman stood by a makeshift table at the base of the cathedral approach. His eyes alternated between the drawing of the soon-to-be finished front tower and the image of the clockwork construction.
It will take some more time. Fortunately, it seems similar to any old clock tower, which is good. It will likely fit in the tower as is.
He spoke absent-mindedly. Maria walked back to her with a questioning face. I am still bewildered. What is the meaning of this new clockwork mechanism?
No!
Luna threw her hands down on the table.
Not a clock tower! A dial! It will align itself if it is done right. The mechanism is not what powers it, but the starlight that the lenses capture.
The foreman looked up and scratched his head.
Then what are all these parts for? Sure looks like a clockwork. With some or more altercations.
Look, you are both welcome to read my notes and every material I base them on, but it will surely take you a couple of weeks to comprehend the stuff.
The foreman simply grunted at the prospect of doing her work. Maria turned her eyes back up towards the unfinished tower. It will look nice in the front.
I think so too. And the secrets it will reveal.
Sedative. Liquid medicine concocted at Bergenworth calms the nerves. Those who delve into the arcane fall all too easy to madness, and thick, human blood serves to calm the frayed nerves of these inquisitive minds. Naturally, this often leads to a reliance on blood ministration.